Councillors, welcome to the special council meeting for September. As always, it's important that we firstly acknowledge traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and acknowledge their ongoing connection to this community and country here in Bassendean. Item 2 on the agenda is public question time. We have Peter.
Yeah.
Decreed, he's here tonight from the West Australian, are you? Did you have any questions you'd like to ask? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item 3, which is attendances, apologies and applications for leave. So Councillor Melissa Mikachuk is on leave at the moment. Nothing else. We don't have an item on the agenda for declarations of interest, but Councillor Ganja.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to declare an interest for the Wonder Realm application. It's no secret I have a close association with the event, as I have been the MC voluntarily in the past event held this year, and also helped with the organisation, and also have a close relationship with the applicant as well. So therefore I declare an interest, and I will be leaving the room when that comes up for discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Gangel. Are there any other declarations of interest? Okay, thank you. So item 4 is report. So 4.1 is the first item for consideration tonight. This is the application from the Old Perth Road Collective for the Spook Fest on the 31st of October. Firstly, are there questions for the staff? Councillor Hamilton.
Can I move that we suspend standing orders so that we can have a free and easy discussion?
So we've got a mover to suspend standing orders. Is there a seconder? Councillor Quinton. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Councillor Hamilton, what would you like to bring up?
Okay.
It's not confidential. Sorry.
Someone else wants to ask questions first. Let me just...
So who's the officer that we're asking to?
Yep.
Thank you. Can we get some more detail on exactly what the $5,600 is that they presume to spend on this event? I can clearly see road closure is $300.
Yep.
For a sign, the men's share to do their usual $500, which is lovely.
Yep.
Lighting and a DJ for $1,000. Electrician sign off hay bales for $500. Marketing and social media $600. But what I'm not clear on is the $2,200 that would be spent on entertainment on the day and decorations and craft supplies. It's very vague. I don't understand exactly what it is that our ratepayers would be spending this money on.
Yeah.
Is there more clarity we can get around this cost figure?
I'd have to take that question on notice.
Just as a point of order, I don't think you can, because we have to make the decision tonight, is my understanding.
Well, all I can say is that it's probably not unreasonable for $1,300 for entertainment when you're looking at face painting, popcorn, fairy floss. I mean, those things do come at a premium. I mean, they're not exactly cheap, those sorts of activities. So, you know, as we assess the application, the panel assess the application, and it is, you know, there is some limitation in the information that's been provided, and that's why, you know, the recommendation has been that if council does approve funding, that we do get a program activities, a bona fide, you know, confirmed program activities, what they should be planning to do, as well as you know, some clarification on these costs. I mean, these costs are very much indicative of what is going to cost the stage of the event. Plus, it has been scaled back from the original application that was lodged. The costs are a lot higher. I can't sort of give you I just can't give you that sort of line by line explanation for each of those costs as to what that, you know, $1,300 would be made up for, as well as the, you know, those other costs your question, other than to say that I think some of those things like face painting and other activities, it can be quite costly. So I don't think that's an unreasonable request for funding when it comes to entertainment for this type of event.
Okay, because my other question was similar children's events that we've had where we've employed a face painter and things like that. From memory, we had the Mary Crescent opening. Do we spend that kind of money for that kind of event? And because I think we also had a community group involved in that event.
Look, I can't recall. I wasn't directly involved in organising that event for the opening of the Mary Crescent Reserve Playground. I know with NAIDOC Family Day, we engaged the Bassendean Cultural Advancement Group to do our face painting, and and they have a number of face painters that come on the day, and we pay them around $1,000 to do that face painting for us on NAIDOC Day. Now, NAIDOC is a different event; it's a large scale event compared to this, but I think it just shows that there's a range of entertainment options there, without having a specific quote in front of me to sort of say, look, this is exactly what each item will cost. It's a bit hard to sort of quantify that, but I just think based on my experience in these events and based on some of the costs of the markets that incurred around some of these entertainment options, it's probably not unreasonable to be requesting that amount of funding to fund this entertainment.
Okay, now it's well known that the town runs Keen on Halloween, which has year after year become more and more popular, and our staff are to be congratulated at how well that event is run, and it permeates right throughout the town. It's not concentrated in a small area. It's a well patronised event by our residents. So, given that our staff already run social media for Keen on Halloween, already do promotions for that, I'm kind of curious about the mentoring, which is mentioned in the report here, because obviously our staff can quite easily mentor this group through the Keen on Halloween program. But it also brings up, and there's staff time involved in mentoring, because instead of just going bang straight into doing their work, they're actually teaching someone along the way. So there's extra staff time to be diverted to mentoring this group. But there are costs here which I don't understand, given that we as a council already do marketing and social media. There's costs there for $600 from this group. But on top of that, there's a bump in event delivery and bump out of $2,750. Now, I would assume that the staff in this town would be largely responsible for the bump in and bump out, and yet there's $2,750 here included as part of their costs, in-kind contribution, volunteer.
Yeah.
I am unclear as to how much staff time is actually going to be dedicated to facilitating this event, in addition to the financial $5,600 that's been requested of us, which is ratepayers' money.
Sure.
And my question is, the ratepayers are already receiving a really successful event from us called Keen on Halloween. Where does this fit into that? I mean, if we are already delivering on that date a very successful event that just gets bigger and bigger every year, where does this $5,600 fit into that? And if we talk about face painting, my other question is, most children who are door knocking for Halloween are already dressed up, ready to rock and roll with their door knocking. So is face painting really going to be required on that day?
Maybe let him answer some of your questions. You've asked about 5.
I have, sorry. I just got on a roll. Sorry.
The application, I'll say this with the greatest respect to the applicant in this meeting, the application is not perfect. It's limited in some of the information that's been provided here. In assessing this application, in terms of the Keen on Halloween online engagement, I suppose if bit of a word, you call it an community engagement program the town runs. We see there's an opportunity to package up this Spookfest event with that Keen on Halloween as a way to, get the community out there, they do trick-or-treating, and we haven't quite worked out how that marketing strategy will work, but have them congregate down at the east end of Old Perth Road. So there's a way to cross-promote both events, so I don't think it will take away from what the town does, but it might enhance and sort of package that up and promote it.
So I don't mean to interrupt you, but I know following last year's Keen on Halloween event, it's mainly the youth services staff who
Yes.
do that. And
Yes.
I know there'd been discussion between Greg and Aidan about how potentially there was opportunity to bring people together
Yes.
at the end of the door knocking instead of having all this great stuff happening in isolation around the town. And I think they were considering doing something that was more centralised as a climax to the Keen on Halloween event. Is that correct?
Absolutely. But it'll still be run as it was sort of normally run online, and people register and get out there and trick or treat. But we just saw that opportunity to really leverage off this event. They both cross promote one another and make the most of it, I suppose.
So I do have a follow-up question there, because you mentioned in that the social media campaign and what have you is quite well done by the town, and yet there are costs put into this by this group that are obviously things that are going to be done by the town. So I have some difficulty understanding how we've come to some of these figures when clearly the town will be mentoring this group, which means, again, a lot of staff time, and we'll be using town resources to actually facilitate this event, which, as you've just said, or the Mayor's just asked it, could have been facilitated by the existing staff who are already producing the Keen on Halloween.
I guess so, Kath. In the interim, there's been the development of the town team. Council has given a commitment to try and support communities driving some more of these projects. So that's why staff from the youth services haven't driven this themselves, but have handed it over to Old Perth Red Collective when they showed an interest.
I agree with that, but also we're responsible for managing ratepayers' money in a manner that will deliver the best outcomes. So I come back to the question, is this the best use of ratepayers' money to deliver an end product?
I don't think that's something you're expected to answer.
Do you have any more information about the 3 community craft events leading up to the Spookfest?
I can answer that. I understand the coordinator of the Old Perth Road Collective was planning on having some sessions to create things like carved pumpkins, broomsticks, etc., to really be props on the day. So that was the idea of the 3 craft sessions.
Councillor Hamilton?
Given that you've had interaction with the organiser for this, would they be perhaps accepting perhaps a scaled down type? Given that there's obviously a lack of experience from this group in producing events, would it be better for them to perhaps get the mentoring from the staff, but start off small rather than trying to cover such a broad range of activities?
Well, but that's certainly an option. It's certainly an option to, as I said earlier, this application, the final application we're considering tonight, was scaled back from the initial application lodged. But that's certainly an option the council can consider, is to, approve a lesser amount, which would then enable, for a smaller event to be staged. And so it's, I suppose they can work up to staging bigger events down the track. But that's an option. I mean, it's not unreasonable to maybe go down that path if that's what council feels is probably the better option. So.
Councillor Gadjo and Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to question, just so I can get an understanding of the locality in which they're wanting to stage the event. Is it in front of the Rossi Shopping Centre? Is that the area that I'm thinking of, or is it in front of the town administration here? Whereabouts are they?
So the east end we're looking at between Whitfield and Palmerston Street.
Yeah.
East end.
So, but Palmerston Street though is parallel to Old Perth Road. So you mean Whitfield to James? Is that what you? Or Whitfield to Hamilton?
It's going lengthwise from Old Perth Road down to Palmerston. Whitfield.
Oh, so it's not going along Old Perth Road?
That's right.
It's along Old Perth Road, the
In
east end
front
of
of
Old Perth
the
Road.
old Lira and what was Hedgehogs?
Yes, so it's going along Old Perth Road, not down Whitfield
that
Street,
sense.
because it's going.
No,
Obviously, to get
it's
Palmerston
between.
Street.
It's
you
on
have-
Old Perth Road between.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. So it's not Palmerston Street. It's Whitfield and Hamilton that it's going to be stretched along on Old Perth Road.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, I
so
just want to confirm that.
Palmerston
Okay.
is
Yeah.
It's just that you've got West Road and Hamilton in one part of the thing, and then you've got Palmerston mentioned in another section, so that's why it's confusing.
Okay, my apologies. That Palmerston shouldn't be mentioned.
On their application, it says West Road and Hamilton.
That's
Huge, yes.
We partner with local business to provide in-kind support to activate Old Perth Road between West Road and Hamilton Street. That's on page 3.
I do know this has evolved a bit since the initial discussions with town staff, and
Yep.
I understand initially it was planned to take place in the car park at the Hawaiian Shopping Centre. I think the preference was then to move it closer this way, in front of Old Lira and Hedgehogs and so on. So that's my understanding of the latest state, but this has been a formative, iterative project, and we still haven't got a run sheet or program for what the evening will look like. And I guess the Old Perth Road Collective are still in their embryonic stages of development, and the town has tried to support them.
all right. So, given that they're in their embryonic stages and everyone needs to learn to walk before they can run, I'm wondering if council, if we can have a quick discussion about maybe scaling this back a bit, because I'm getting the sense that they just want to do everything, but they clearly don't have, from what I'm hearing, a run sheet. We're not even sure where it's going to be, what these 3 events leading up to it are, who's going to that. So I'm wondering if we, since we've suspended standing orders, have a bit more of a discussion about that.
What are you trying to do, Councillor Gandhi?
Thank you. I would like to highlight, and as I did last week, that this has been an extremely rushed process with getting the policy through and then trying to get this to a panel and then get it submitted to council. So that's why it's perhaps not in its most formative position currently. So I would urge councillors to have a bit of latitude in relation to what we've got on the agenda tonight, because it is a very much back-to-back-to-back process that we've undertaken, and hence why some of it's not fully flushed out.
Thank you, Councillor Gandhi.
I'd like to move a procedural motion to reinstate standing orders so that we can debate this under standing orders properly.
I'll second that.
Oh,
Is anybody against? All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Question or new motion?
No, I'm standing under the standing orders to move the officer recommendation.
Councillor Gandhi?
happy to second.
Seconded. Are there people against? Councillor Wilson, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Worship. I've listened to all of the concerns that other councillors have, and it appears to me that they'll all be picked up and addressed in point 2 of the officer recommendation. What is being asked for is an upper limit on a budget, but the assurances that I have that it will be done properly come in point A, which says that the town would establish a joint working party with the collective, and B, that the final program would need to be approved by the Director of Community Planning. So as these issues are worked through, I'm confident that we will eventually land on something that is lower than what the upper limit that we'd be approving is, and that it would be within the capacity of both the Old Perth Road Collective to deliver and also staff to ensure dovetails in nicely with our Keen on Halloween program that's been so successful. I like the idea in general because I've participated for the last several years, either as someone dressed up in a spooky outfit giving out lollies and fruit to kids, or taking my own kids around to houses. It's very well loved. Lots of families get dressed up, embrace the event, and it would be nice that if people are all dressed up, they've got somewhere to go afterwards. And I think if we can finish the event by bringing everyone together so they can marvel at each other's handiwork and creativity, that's better than going home and gorging themselves on lollies. So for all of those reasons, I'm happy to support the officer recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Before you speak, Councillor Ganger, Councillor Wilson, for one of the other items on the agenda tonight, it talks about undertaking an evaluation of the event and providing feedback. Would you be happy to include that for this as a point 3? Because I think in general for all of the events that the town runs as associated with it, it would be good for us to do a formal evaluation of.
Thank you, Your Worship. I am happy to incorporate that specifically in the wording. I had imagined it would happen by way of course in any event, but if it gives other councillors comfort to have those words included as a new point C, I'm happy to accept that.
Councillor Ganger as a seconder, are you happy with that?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, no issue.
Can I ask a question about that?
Just hold on 2 seconds.
So I've now added a point 3, which is the same point 3 from item 4.2.
Sure, that would be fantastic, thank you. From 4.2 or 4.3? I didn't think there was a line on 4.2.
Oh, okay, there's a different one. There's 4.2 says, notes that given the large scale of the event, an independent evaluation is provided at the conclusion of the event to review process and outcomes.
Yeah.
That's 4.2.
I don't think it needs to be as...
No, I think the point 3 from item 4.3 is
Yes, thank you.
preferable.
Councillor Hamilton, you had a question?
Sorry, so you're adding...
The point 3 from 4.3, which is on page 15. Notes a comprehensive evaluation of the event will be undertaken in order to inform future decisions regarding events.
The question I had was in one, I think it was 4.2, it was an independent evaluation. I was going to ask a question about how much that would cost. I'm assuming that we're not going to
No, we just removed that part.
We're not going to do an independent costly evaluation. It's going to be an in-house.
Yes.
Right,
and
thank
feedback to the community group.
Right, okay.
Councillor Gangel, your opportunity.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, look, happy to support this, and would encourage councillors just to keep somewhat of an open mind. We have put in a new policy at the last month's council meeting that has impacted obviously on the timeframes of submissions coming to the town. So I think we have to have a fair bit of latitude whilst we iron out this process. Look, more than happy to support this initiative. I think it's fantastic and wonderful to actually get people out in our main street, to give our main street a bit of a pulse, a bit of a heartbeat. If you go out there right now, let me tell you, there's not much pulse, there's not much heartbeat going on. So I think what the town needs to look at is long term. Clearly there is clear interest in having events in our main street. There's clear interest and there's clear evidence that says that events in our main street are very effective and work very well. The ongoing benefits to businesses as well, with people getting out in our main street and supporting the businesses, the restaurants, the bars and the like, is a very positive thing. What the town should be looking at doing, since we have this interest in events in our town, specifically in our main street, is creating a town centre piazza. I spoke about a few months ago about starting it off with getting some bollards in the road, so it's easier to close off the section, so we can have it as a closed off section where we can have events commonly happening.
Maybe
So
straying off topic.
no, this is about events. This is absolutely about events, and this is what and we're talking about the One Planet. I can go through the One Planet, indeed, about what it actually says about economic growth, Your Worship, what it says about community, Your Worship, and how creating a town centre piazza that can actually have events held here without the ongoing costs and stuff, I think will be absolutely terrific for our town. And I think this is just the start potentially of something fantastic leading into the future, where we hopefully have many more exciting and different events occurring in our main street and giving it a pulse and a heartbeat that it's so desperately desiring. Thank you.
I'm so glad you enjoyed that opportunity, Councillor Gangel. Councillor Hamilton, would you like to speak?
Okay. Despite Councillor Gangel's assessment that the timeline has been short for this. I understand from questions posed to the staff that this group had already submitted or canvassed having a much larger event and scaled it back. My concern relates to the inexperience of this group. They're only a very new group. They should learn to walk before they can run, and so I am not adverse to them running a function, but I do believe that given the amount of staff time that will be involved in mentoring this group, that they really need to scale it back to a more manageable thing, given in fact that, you know, the event is not that far away. So we're only talking a matter of 5 weeks before the event happens. So the fact that we have so little information when the event is looming, and given that they have, in theory, provided a much bigger program previously to staff, I'm surprised at the lack of information that's provided in this application.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Speakers for?
Yes, I will speak for. Councillor Gangel has swayed me because I do think that I do want to give them cut them some slack given how rushed they've had to be to get this in. I know that there is already great excitement within the community for this event. My concern goes back to what was originally supposed to be this whole idea of this framework was about equality in terms of people applying for funding under this framework. When we have events that already happen in this town and we have community groups that apply for funding from the town of Bassendean at a much lower cost for much bigger events. So my concern was more about the large amount of money. I'm sure they're going to have an amazing time, but what I'm concerned about is the precedence this kind of decision will make. I just want to put that on the record. Although I am voting for this, I think that this is something that needs to be taken into consideration, is that we are here to make decisions for the whole community. Some people won't want to come to this Halloween event. Some people don't want to go to Carols by Candlelight. That's their choice. But it's our job to make sure that the funding that we're giving out to these community groups is fair and equitable.
Thank you, Councillor Quinton. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Wilson?
Thank you. I waive my right of reply.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Councillor Wilson, Gangel, Quinton, Brown and McLennan, and against is Councillor Hamilton. That is carried.
May I have recorded in my reasons? Yes? No? I'm voting against this because I do believe that we need to provide value for money for our ratepayers, and given the short timeline before the event happens and given the lack of information that's in the application, I have doubts about the adequacy of the application. And as Councillor Quinton has said, I believe that we should provide value for money when we're giving out these grants. And so I do wish to see in the future greater detail in these applications if they're going to receive the full grant funding.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Okay, so moving on to 4.2. Thank you, Councillor Gangel. So this is the Wonder Realm application from Nella Fitzgerald Events. First of all, questions on this item? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship. So, with regard to the funds that the town is contributing, or recommended, that the town contributes to the running of the event, has the request just been to go into the general pot of the budget, or is it being hypothecated against specific things within the budget?
Sorry, Councillor Wilson, when you say, can you just explain the question, please?
Yes, so the request for funds in the application is...
Councillor Wilson, maybe to Paul.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, sorry. So the request for funds in the application is for $50,000, and it's a confidential attachment, isn't it, the itemised budget?
Yes.
Yes. generally speaking as I can, is the amount just given over as a general contribution to the running event, or is that $50,000 going to pay for specific items within the budget?
Okay, so part of that from the budget perspective. So as part of the approved 2019-20 budget, we had $200,000 allocation for major events, and two major events potentially flagged at the time were one from Australia. Separately, we had $300,000 flagged for other events. For example, the proposed funding speed test that I was discussing before under that $300,000 category. As far as
So, Trey, you would answer the second half of the question?
Yes, so the 50,000, if approved by the council, the proponent was looking to allocate that for all the entertainment, the cultural performances, to cover the, there was some fees there for the contribution to the Fringe Festival for marketing, and there was also it was to offset some of the costs related to infrastructure. It doesn't cover all the costs for infrastructure, but it was going to help offset those costs. So that was sort of the rough breakdown of what that 50,000, what the proponent advisor should, if approved, they would allocate that funding for specifically.
Okay. Thank you for the answer in two parts. I guess that went to a concern that I had that it might have in some way subsidised the ticketed events components, but are you saying that you're confident that it will be going to infrastructure type costs or free event components and not to any of the for fee parts of the event?
We're confident, but I think how we can foolproof that is if the council does approve the funding, that in the funding agreement that we stipulate that the $50,000 can only be applied to the to the cultural performances for those free events, to make a contribution towards infrastructure and and a contribution towards marketing of the event, and that she will need to supply tax invoices to when including the funds to prove that. And the ticket events would need to be self-funding in that regard. So we could put that stipulation to make sure that our money's being spent appropriately.
Can I just ask, obviously the event was fantastic last year, but it was only held over one weekend, and the town's contribution was significantly lower than what's proposed this year. Can you help me understand the rationale for now having it over 2 weekends? And my concern is primarily for our staff resources, particularly following on for the Australia Day event, and how that's going to impact on their ability to deliver both.
We met with Nella Fitzgerald, probably maybe 6 weeks ago now, a couple of months ago, to explain, the different approach and how funding would be approved as we're working out the new governance framework. I suppose, Nella outlined sort of a vision for the event. She's a big thinker, so she's very good at the vision. And whilst we appreciate that it's going to be over 2 weekends, I suppose we see, it does need to be managed, and there is a risk in that the event could be too big over 2 weekends. So it does need to be managed, and we need to be confident that the program can be implemented. But Nella was looking to expand the event, particularly not only from the free events, but having a focus for events for children, as well as bringing in ticketed events which she hasn't had in the past. I think the last time she did it was when she did Italian Live Lounge back in 2016. I think it was just the last time she did it when she did a fringe event.
So the increase in the contribution requested from the town, does that reflect the fact that the event is now on a larger scale?
Yes, and over 2 weekends. It's almost double, it's double the size. So, and certainly you asked about sort of staff hours, there certainly is an impact with only sort of a week after Australia Day. And we will, you know, I don't think we can abdicate our responsibility from this event, but even though we're making it, if we do decide to make a contribution, we do have a responsibility as well. We're event partners essentially, and so you know, it's incumbent on us to be active partners in staging this event. So it will require staff time, and I suppose the staff hours that we've indicated here is an estimate of what we think is required. So,
Councillor Hamilton, I know you've got a question, but just following on from what Mrs. Siciliano said, as our CEO, do you, if this was to be approved by council in its current form, are you comfortable with the drain on the staff resources that it would require during that period of time?
I guess I noticed the strain that it was being placed this year, where we had Australia Day and then the following weekend Wonder Realm, and staff were stretched. This certainly is another weekend, so essentially we've got 3 consecutive weekends where we've got major events on. I think it's just a matter of scheduling our resourcing and maybe providing some surge capacity if Wonder Realm was to be held over an additional weekend from this year. So it's certainly something that I think if we forecast and manage, we can deal with, but I think it just requires some careful planning at our end.
yes.
Because it's great to deliver something to our community, but we also need to look after our staff.
Definitely.
Councillor Hamilton?
The staffing time is only an estimate. I do have concerns whether that estimate is, I don't know, did you base that on last year's events?
Yeah, it was some of it was based. It's an estimate. It's based on what we provided last year and what we felt would be required this year.
I guess my question is because it's if it's over 2 weekends.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if the staffing time might actually be significantly higher, given that you've got 2 separate weekends of bump in, bump out, all those aspects to it, whereas previously it was confined to the one time slot over 1 weekend. So I am a little bit concerned about the actual allocation of staff time there, whether it will explode outwards because it's actually split over 2 weekends. So that's a question that I think only you can answer.
With the Chair's indulgence, to answer the question, a lot of the officers' time is being allocated to one-off events. If I can perhaps use the health officers' role as an example in this, the hours that the health officers have allocated is in relation to doing clearance inspections for the food vendors. Once that's done, that role is completed. So the fact that it's over 2 weekends doesn't mean they're having to do that role twice, therefore the hours is doubling. It's still the same time that has to be allocated. Obviously there are some elements of the event which perhaps those hours will increase, but for the most part the answer is no.
Okay. Thank you, that's really helpful.
So I do have another question. On page 2 of the applicant's details, which is in confidential documents, there's an anomaly there in that no other funding sources are identified. However, I do note that further on in the application on the 3rd last page, there are some additional funding sources listed. So the 3rd last page.
Is that where it's Patrick Gorman and Dave Kelly, is it?
Well, we've got top of the page with Town of Bassendean, and then we've got 3 others listed straight underneath on the 3rd last page. Obviously that's an anomaly between one page of the application and another part of the application which is outlining the financial details. On top of that, my curiosity extends to the Fringe Festival also offering grant monies or sponsorships and things like that. So the financials, I don't know the accuracy of the financials, given that applying for grants is somewhat of an ongoing process. So yes, at the beginning when the application was filled out, it only asks, have you applied for any others? And the answer is no. But there's obviously, from the third last page, an intent to apply for other grants. So I'm just curious about when we get these applications, how accurate they really are. And I know that I've heard tonight a couple of times, it'll all work out in the wash more or less, which is a very blunt way of putting it. But I thought the whole process, this implementation of this process was designed to provide greater clarity. And I just feel a little insecure that clarity is not here.
Councillor, I think your points are valid, but I think you also need to acknowledge that this is a new framework and that there hasn't been as much time as would be ideal, and that in the future that there will be more opportunity for the staff to work with applicants, with a fair.
Yeah, and I guess we did rush these through because obviously Keen on Halloween is next month. And this is a significant event, and we're 6 months out from the date of it being held, and so both organisers were keen on getting a response, but I guess the challenge has been getting the level of specificity that we need for council to make a decision. I guess in terms of addressing some of the costing issues, we can put the air conditioner on if you like.
Back on.
It's on 24.
Oh, no, it's on.
Who turned it off?
Might have been me.
Some of us might feel a little bit more than others.
It's coming off.
It was me, I turned it off.
We're just melting over here.
I guess one of the things that we haven't paid a lot of attention to is evaluation of these events. So we had, Australia Day, Wonder Realm earlier this year, and they were back to back, both significant investments. So going forward, one of the things we'd like to do is close the loop and get a better sense of how much did we actually spend on these events in terms of staff time, but also were there any unforeseen costs, any unforeseen risks that we didn't anticipate, and it's learning for the town, but also learning for our event organisers as well. So, and being able to continually improve the framework, but also how we go about sponsorships and grants going forward.
Well, at this point, I think I would like to advise that I would seek to move an amended amount which is lower, because I'm not entirely sure that spread over 2 weekends, and given the drain on the staff resources, I'm not entirely sure that best serves our council, our staff and our community. So
we let Councillor Quinton ask her question, and then if you want to propose an amendment or move a motion afterwards, you're more than welcome to do so. Councillor Quinton.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask around the safety provisions of the Dragon Boating Day. What further risk assessment are we having to do in terms of ensuring that everyone is safe around those boats? And just tell me, it's not the community getting in the boats. Well, how's that going to? Because my experience of dragon boat racing is that you have to have had a team together and you train and then you race. But this is a dragon boating day. It doesn't sound like it's a race. So I'm just wondering what our safety provisions are and liability is around a boat, people and boats.
The risk, given the risk management program, I suppose, plan for this event is still being developed. It hasn't been finalised. We will have to do a risk assessment, go on site. I mean, it's up to the proponent to provide that risk management plan. That's a requirement as part of the event application process. So that needs to be done, and that's contained in our event application guidelines. Quite specific about that. But we need to be satisfied that she's developed the right risk management plan to mitigate the risk with dragon boat racing or display, whatever we want to call it. So that will involve us to go down and do some sort of risk assessment and just make sure that we're satisfied that it's going to be a safe activity as part of this event. So it's a bit of a working, that's still going to be developed, and be upfront about that. And I think in the assessment here we've outlined that
Okay.
program is still being.
And that staff time and assessment, is that included in the 112 hours that's been budgeted for this event of staff time, or would that be additional?
With the Chair's indulgence, a lot of the safety checks are actually covered by governance procedures that we'll have to follow. I must admit I'm not overly aware of what dragon boat racing safety measures include, but officers will definitely have to look at that, and we'll need to liaise with the event organisers. But if I can offer you an example, obviously when we had the carnival equipment last time, there were licensing clearances that they had to provide to us before the events proceeded. There's obviously also checks and balances in place in terms of proof of liability coverages, things of that respect. All of those things will have to be addressed as part of the administrative procedure that we'll follow.
Okay, thank
Thank you. Is it you're done? Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just one last question. It's hypothetical in nature, and I appreciate that there's already been one foreshadowed amendment. If I was hypothetically to move an amendment to say that at item 2 we approved funding in the amount of up to $50,000 for items listed under the logistics and infrastructure and marketing headings, is there anything that you're aware of that's going to create problems for the event if we were to go that way?
Look, I think, in talking to, in working through this with Nala, I think the biggest, what she's seeking to use our money for is the cultural performances, the artists for those free events, a bit of infrastructure and marketing. So, if, it was approved up to, which could be a lesser amount, is that what you're sort of implying, Councillor Wilson?
Well, just looking at the subtotal for the logistics and infrastructure and the subtotal for marketing, and notice that that's a figure equal to 50,000. If we were to give a contribution for those two items specifically, do you think that's going to create holes in the budget that will cause problems?
Look, it may do. I'm not clear. So I'm thinking there's traffic management costs as well that need to be covered as well.
Maybe a CEO can speak to this as
Can
well.
I just,
That's included in logistics.
Councillor Wilson, I was just picking up on your comment. So under logistics and infrastructure, we're looking at spending almost 41,000 based on and under marketing just over 11,000.
Yes.
So effectively, the 50,000 could be allocated to that.
For those two purposes, against receipts. Yeah.
Definitely. It just may be an issue of cash flow, and I'm not quite sure of the applicant's position in that regard. But certainly we could specify in our agreement with the applicant that this is what the $50,000 is designed to be apportioned to.
Yes. Unless there's sources of funding for those other two that we're not aware of in the application, in which case.
If I can
Yes.
through the chair, I know that
And then you, Councillor.
Ms. Fitzgerald advised that Hawaiian had confirmed that they would fund the event up to $5,000, so that appears to be a confirmed additional source of funding.
So what were they actually funding though specifically?
5,000.
Oh, but we don't know what for particularly.
Yeah. A cash contribution of 5,000.
Have you finished, Councillor Wilson?
I have.
Yes, Councillor Hamilton?
I note there's no historical information provided on what we've funded previously for, I believe, I recall $20,000 being one figure. Was that last year?
That's right.
Right. So last year, for one weekend, we funded 20,000, that was the town of Bassendean's contribution.
That was a direct cash contribution, like a grant, you could say. That was done in the absence of the small student governance framework, the small student grants policy that we have now. That was 20,000, but in addition to that, we did
Staff
provide,
time.
yeah, staff time, and we did provide significant support in other areas such as traffic management and a bit of marketing, and did assist the proponent with some waste collection.
So is that the 32,500?
Yeah.
So would you anticipate with this year's budget of 50,000 that there potentially would be additional costs over and above that as there were last year?
Look, I think with these type of events, there's always, I suppose, there's a risk of there's also some risk that that there could be some additional costs that could come up, and someone would have to cover that. I think if we proceeded with to approve that, if council was able to approve 50,000 for the grant, we'd have to really again through the funding agreement, but sit down with Ms. Fitzgerald and really be very clear about the program, the budget, and who's responsible for what costs. Look, it's a hard question to answer. I mean, but there could be, there's a risk that there could be some additional costs that come up that, yeah.
Sorry, with the chair's indulgence. I think much like the answer I offered with officers' time, a lot of the costs are a one-off expense, and the fact that this event is potentially over 2 weekends rather than one will not add to the cost. So quite correctly, the grant for the previous event was $20,000, but there was also additional funding that came out of our operating expenditure, and that funding assisted in areas such as the waste management, portaloos, signage, advertising, traffic management, and a wide range of things. Now, these costs, the fact that it's over 2 weekends, are not likely to be any greater than if it's a single weekend event. So in that sense, to answer the question, no, I wouldn't expect these costs to go up significantly.
And those costs that you just listed, that were the additional costs of last year, if they've now been factored in to the amount that you've proposed for this event?
Yes, yeah. We discussed that matter at length, and we've made it clear to the event organiser that if I could use the analogy, I think there were some creases that had to be ironed out last year, and through last year's event I am confident, officers are confident that we have actually done that, and that the event organiser is aware that the obligation lies with the event organiser to address these matters, that it is not the town's role to address.
So just like your comment a moment ago about how some of that needed to be worked out, I'm hearing that the position would be this is the allocation, and anything over and above that is the responsibility of the event organiser.
Yeah.
So further to that, the town has always been extremely cooperative with this event organiser in promotion and what have you. So even though you've rolled that into a cost which is supposed to be stopping with the event organiser now, my assumption, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the town would still provide promotion through Facebook and social media and what have you. So the figure quoted is exclusively her expenditure, or because the town's got a cost involved there as well.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, through the chair. We recognise that this event, while it's being principally run by the event organiser, we do recognise that it is a partnership between the organiser and the town, and that there are some aspects of it we will remain involved with in terms of promotion as such, and my colleague I'm sure can speak more to that. But where those matters have an immediate financial cost, they are to be borne by the event organiser, and that has been made clear to the event organiser. It will be reinforced that we will not be taking on additional expenditure beyond the grant that's been offered, should the council choose to support that.
Any further questions?
Oh, I just had a question following on from Councillor Wilson's question about acquitting the receipts. Was that always going to be the intention? Because a grant is a grant. So are we giving her the money as a grant under the framework? Or was it always the intention that she needed to provide us then with a list of receipts of what she spent it on? Because I don't ever remember us having that conversation.
So within the framework, there's provision for acquittal at the end of the process. So there's the opportunity, I think, to include potentially a further recommendation that potentially a funding agreement be developed with the applicant to be clear that the town's allocation is up to $50,000 based upon funding for logistics and infrastructure and marketing expenses only. So the expectation is upon production of receipts, the funding will be made available.
Got it. Thank you.
Any further questions?
Shall I move my alternative?
Well, someone has to move the motion.
You need to stand up, Kat.
Oh, sorry.
Do that.
Sorry, I'm half asleep. In the alternative, I was just going to change paragraph 2.2.
So just to be clear, that point 5 that the CEO has just read out, you're including that in your alternative
Sorry,
at this point?
what was point 5 again?
The council develop a funding agreement with the applicant to be clear that the town's allocation is up to $50,000 based upon funding for logistics and infrastructure and marketing, cultural events, logistics and infrastructure and marketing expenses only.
No, I wasn't moving that. I was going to move my...
That's fine. I was just checking whether you said a change to the recommendation, whether you were including that point 5 that she just read out. But you're not.
I don't mind including logistical, but my valuation was going to be $40,000. Sorry?
Okay, so hold on. Councillor Hamilton's moving the officer recommendation with an amendment to point 2, which has reduced the amount to $40,000.
And instead of having from 8th to the 10th and 14th to the 16th, I was going to have, delete that, event to be held in February 2020. Now my logic for that was to enable the organiser to perhaps drop it back to 1 weekend instead of 2. So
that's your motion?
yes, sorry.
No, sorry. So is there a seconder for Councillor Hamilton's motion? No, so that is lost. Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to move the officer's recommendation with one amendment to point 2, such that it would read, the intent being that we approve the $50,000 as requested, but limit it to marketing and logistics and infrastructure.
So Councillor Wilson, that point 5 that we read out previously, that doesn't cover your intention?
No, it goes further than my intention because it included cultural matters.
Oh, sorry, I added that in because I thought that you mentioned that previously.
No, it did come up in discussion, but I think for the purposes of what I intend to move, it's that we would provide up to $50,000 to cover those items listed in the budget under marketing and under logistics and infrastructure.
Yep.
I acknowledge that there will be cash flow issues there, so I don't require that the funds be expended before they be reimbursed, but I do require that there be a reconciliation at least.
So I'm sorry if you've already answered this, but if we take out that cultural, so the point 5 that we read out before, so develop a funding agreement with the applicant to be clear that the town's allocation is up to $50,000 based upon funding for logistics and infrastructure and marketing expenses only. Are you happy to add that as a point 5 and then leave the rest as was? Or
yes, yeah, that serves the same purpose. Thank you.
Amy?
So, okay, so point 5. And that, well, that, we need that contradicts point 2 because point 2 says increase marketing now.
Yeah. And point 5 is about the agreement.
Yes.
Okay, so Councillor Wilson is moving the officer recommendation with point 5.
Yes.
Yes, and the point 5 saying that those funds will be for logistics and infrastructure and marketing as per the application, and to be reconciled at some point. against expensive
Okay.
expenditure.
Is everyone clear on the motion? Is there a seconder? Councillor Quinton. Is there anybody against? Councillor Hamilton. Councillor Wilson, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Your Worship. This is a learning experience for all of us as we implement a new scheme. The scheme that the intention of which is to try and get some transparency and consistency in how we sponsor events in our community. I went to the Wonder Realm event last time. It was fabulous. There is, in large part because of Councillor Danger's contributions as an MC, I might add, it appears there is some ambition there in extending it to 2 weekends, and I appreciate Councillor Hamilton's concern for the well-being of the organisers in staging an event across 2 weekends, but I'm happy to give it a try, and if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, then we can always take the learnings from that in the way we approach any future applications. So I'm comfortable supporting the quantum of the request and the dates and duration that have been outlined in the application, but I do think that it is prudent for us to maybe establish a pattern where our contributions are towards marketing and towards staging, infrastructure, logistics, all of those sorts of things that are necessary at the front end to make the event happen, and then leaving the cultural content to the event organiser to sort out, as is their role, and would encourage councillors to support the amended motion.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Quinton.
Now this is what I call value for money. This is exactly what we should be having in the town. I sound like Councillor Gangel right now, don't I?
Oh, yeah.
Because he's not in the room, I'm going to channel
Well
him. Because the next item that's coming up, the Australia Day fireworks, is one night for almost triple the amount.
Yes.
So this is $50,000 for 6 nights, and this is exactly what the town of Bassendean needs more of. If we didn't have the Australia Day fireworks, we could have had 3 of these a year. But that aside, the point I'm making about quiddles, very interested about that. I wasn't aware of it, and now that it's been explained to me, I think it is very good in terms of governance and transparency for us to be handing this money out and making sure that there is value for money and that it is receipted. I don't think we need to be specific about it for every event, but I think this is a wonderful event. I went last year and I had a ball, and I think this is absolutely going to put Bassendean on the map again in the height of summer. And now that we have our festoon lighting, which is permanent, and our vibrancy project and everything, this is absolutely something that the town of Bassendean needs.
Thank you, Councillor Quinton. Councillor Hamilton.
To be clear, I think the organiser of this event is excellent, and I agree. The Wonder World event last year was very, very good. However, my concern and my only reason for voting against this is the fact that it's going to be spread over 2 weekends, and given the timeline between our major events, I have concerns about stretching our staff way, way too thin. So that's my concern. I do question the necessity of having it over 2 weekends. I think it was such a great event over 1 weekend, and I'm of the opinion when something works, don't mess with it. So that's the only reason I'm voting against this. Thank you.
Councillor Hamilton. Councillor Brown, would you like to speak?
For?
Either way.
Yeah, I wish I had the debating skills and theatrics of Councillor Gangel myself. I'm looking forward to this extravaganza. The organisers have a history of providing festivals to the town that are a great success, and people here know how enthusiastic I am about the value of festivals, no matter how big or how small, to the health and vibrancy and connectivity and safety of this community. There are checks and balances in place. I'm happy with that. It is budgeted for. At the end of the day, the money will be brought to account as well. Again, I'll just emphasise before I sit down, it is important that we do have a hands-on approach, because we do have a responsibility for our ratepayers' funds, but we need to keep our fingers out. And there's elements of hands-on, fingers in again with this event. Now people know. People know that we have the capacity to host this event. It is a partnership, and I would urge fellow councillors to vote for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, do you feel the need to speak again?
I do not.
Thank you. Okay, let's put that to the vote. All those in favour? Councillor Wilson, Quinton, Brown and McLennan. Against, Councillor Hamilton, and that is carried. Would you like to bring Councillor Gangel back in? So moving on to item 4.3, this is the report for council to note the plans for the Australia Day event that we will be hosting in January. Are there questions for the staff? Welcome back, Councillor Gangel. I have a very minor comment to make. On page 11, it refers to us requesting plastic-free from our food vendors. Can I request that we be a little bit stronger with that and that we require our food vendors to be plastic-free as per our council's policy? I was aware that last year there were a number that were blatantly ignoring, not making any efforts, and I would like to think that those vendors would not be on the top of our priorities for being invited back, whereas those who are making an effort should be given preference. Any questions from councillors? Okay, we have a mover for the officer recommendation. Councillor Wilson moved, seconded.
Sorry, which?
Oh, sorry, we're doing 4.3, the Australia Day, just noting the plans for the coming year.
Okay, thank you.
Are you comfortable, Councillor Gangel?
Just bear with me. Yes, thank you.
So we've got a mover with Councillor Wilson, a seconder with Councillor Hamilton. Is there anybody against? All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 4.4, this is the implementation of the differential rates. So again, this is just noting the action that the staff have taken since we met last week. Are there any questions? We have a mover for the officer recommendation, Councillor Wilson, a seconder, Councillor Quinton. Anybody against? All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, everybody. Meeting closed at 7:38 p.m.